Good day to you. God bless you. Say, welcome to the Shepherd's Chapel. Welcome to this family Bible study hour. Ecclesiastes, koholit in the Hebrew tongue, the preacher. And the wisest preacher probably aside from Christ that walked the earth, Solomon. Giving advice as how you find peace of mind, that is to say, to be happy in these flesh bodies. That's the reward of serving God, of performing the conditions of the Word. You know, many people think that, and they've been taught an oversimplification, falsely, that all you have to do is be saved and tell God you love Him. Well, you know, what good are you as a worker then? About Zippo. And it is your work that brings blessings. That is to say, meeting the conditions of God's Word. That is the work you must do, or works plural, to bring God's blessings. And the gift is free, yes, of salvation. It cost Christ an awesome price. But then God, in His promises, always has a condition attached there too. So you must attain that condition and then find peace of mind in these flesh bodies. So basically now we're in kind of a doctrinal part of the book of the preacher, Ecclesiastes, telling you that wisdom is better than somebody that's a dullard or a fool. You know, you be wise enough to miss the pitfalls rather than stumbling into them. That's using the old head and common sense. Think for yourself and be alert. This is basically the leading here into the 10th chapter. We'd gotten to the 9th verse. Let's pick it up there with a word of wisdom from our Father, written to the flesh body, flesh man that walks under the sun, as to how he can attain peace of mind. Verse 9, chapter 10, and it reads, Whosoever removeth stone shall be hurt therewith, and he that cleaveth wood shall be endangered thereby. In other words, accidents happen. So you want to keep alert. You know, removing stones, of course, if it's somebody's landmark, that can be dangerous in more ways than one. It can also, in not teaching truth, moving stone markers, can get you lost in the wilderness of life. So, and pay attention to what you're doing. An axe is a dangerous tool. Be proficient and skilled in that you decide to do, and you'll do just fine. Okay? Bear in mind, we closed with the fact, he that digs in the hedge, that's where snakes hid out at. Naturally, you want to be wiser than the serpent, or it'll bite you. Verse 10. If the iron be blunt, and he do not whet the edge, then must he put to more strength. But wisdom is profitable to direct. I think that's, so what is the moral to that? If you got a dull axe, sharpen it. Don't worry about it. Otherwise, you're going to have to put out a lot more effort to chop wood with the dull axe. And quite frankly, only a foolish person would do that. Use your head. Sharpen the axe, sharpen the hoe. Keep your tools in good shape. And therefore it makes it a lot easier in life. Wisdom, what does wisdom do here? He says, hey, go sharpen the thing, okay? Keep it on edge. So life is kind of that way. Man causes most of his own trouble by not sharpening his thought as he would an axe and stumbling into trouble. And then you shake your head and say, why in the world did I do that? Knowing it was a dumb thing for a person to do in the first place. So wisdom, even in the flesh, of being heads up, alert, can keep you out of a lot of trouble, or you can stumble into it. So keep sharp, keep your axe sharp, and I suppose that a little lecture on what does wisdom do, it tells you to be prepared. before you go out to use the axe, know that you're going to take a moment to sharpen it, and you'll get a lot more done. Think about what you're going to do. Plan for it, have a schedule, and even have an alternate. In case that schedule doesn't work out, fine. But keep ahead of the game with your mind, and it will save your back a lot of trouble. Okay? Like I said, this is basically doctrinal, telling you how to have a better day. You know, I spend my first hour of the day going over. I get up 1 hour early so that I've got time to plan my entire day and go through it. And it certainly doesn't mean I'm perfect or anything like that, but you get a lot more done rather than staggering out half asleep into a buzzsaw. Okay? Verse 11. Surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. In other words, what is a babbler? A ratchet jaw, just talk, 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 talk all the time. You better have the old serpent enchanted, that is to say, a snake charmer, gets the snake's attention, spends a little time, and has him under the influence of his charm, so to speak, and then he can handle the serpent. But you go walking into it and the snake will bite you. So he says a babbler is no better. In other words, what does a babbler usually say? Nothing. They just would like to talk. Okay? Talk, talk, talk. Verse 12. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, or full of grace, okay? But the lips of a fool will swallow up himself. In other words, the lips of a fool will show himself up. It will ruin his reputation. What? He's a babbler, a fool. You don't have to listen to him long. He'll be happy to tell you he's a fool because he runs off all the time. But a wise man's words gives him a gracious mouth, meaning it wins him favor with people. Now, if your mouth wins you favor with people, if a good break comes along and someone needs to ask someone in your particular profession to do a thing, who do you think they're going to choose, you or the babbler? Who do you think? You think they want some babbler around them, like, let's say, painting. Let's say you were both painters. They're naturally going to choose the painter whose words are gracious and wise. That means he protects his credibility, he keeps his word, and on and on. Naturally, that man is going to get the job. And the fool, he'll probably sniff a little of his own paint thinner or what have you as he's doing his paint job. And who's going to get the job? Well, I think that goes without saying, naturally. Okay, we go to the next verse, verse 13. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness. It's nonsense. And the end of his talk is mischievous madness. In other words, when you try to conclude what he has said, it doesn't make sense because it was a bunch of nonsense to start with. Verse 14, a fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be, and what shall be after him. Who can tell him? After what? Because he's somebody that knows everything about nothing. You ever met a person like that? I mean, knows everything about nothing, and no one can tell him anything. Now, I know that you run across a type like that in your life, and the best thing to do is shun them as far as saddling up with them or teaming up with them to accomplish something. Maybe just pray for them. But you don't want to be saddled with something like that. It's going to cost you, unless there are personal reasons. You can't tell them anything. They're not going to listen to you. You can give them good, sound advice. It will do no good whatsoever in this world until they are ready to help themselves to try to help themselves. The first conclusion they need to come to is, I don't know nothing about nothing. And then maybe they can start realizing that all wisdom comes from our Father and gain a little wisdom. So all that having been said, I think most people are too intelligent to listen to a fool. And I think it's a waste of time. And you can tell about a man in the first 5 minutes you meet him. You're going to most usually be able to come to a pretty good judgment, though you're not to judge, on how far you can trust this individual, okay? 15, the labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. I mean, it worries everybody because he doesn't know what he's doing. And he'll usually, if you absolutely must do something, trial and error is one good way of learning. But when somebody goes through life and that's all they know, and then you've got people that are out of their environment. And every time I come to this verse, I can't help thinking back to the old saying where the city dude, which in his environment he's doing good, but he drives out into the country. Well, in the country we can't afford street signs on every corner. So there's an old milk barn, and there's an old sycamore tree there at that bend in the road, and you take this fork or that fork, and that's the way country people navigate, And the city boy got out there, and he walked up to this farmer, and he said, "How do I get to 10-buck too?" The farmer said, "I really don't know." He said, "Well, do you have any idea about how far it is?" He said, "No, I don't." And the city boy said, "You really don't know very much, do you?" And he said, "Well, at least I'm not lost." So, it's according to whose ox is being gored, and who thinks the other is a fool. So sometimes we have to cut a little slack when we see someone out of their environment, maybe even spend a little time looking after them, making sure they don't get hurt or something of that nature. But it doesn't hurt to cut slack. But an habitual fool is just that. Just that. And they upset everyone and they weary everyone because nothing they do is going to come to anything, and it'll almost drive you to madness to have to put up or be wearied with someone of that nature. 16, woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child, or thinks as a child, and thy princes eat in the morning. In other words, woe to a public figure that is a leader and can't keep his mind on what he's doing and lets the morals of the country slip down below the waist. It's hurtful to a country. That's very biblical. Okay. And the word eat here means they're already drinking, because they always drank when they ate. They started drinking in the morning. Without a clear head, no one can rule anything. You have to keep your mind focused. 17, blessed are they, or thou rather, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles. That means he's been raised with character and morals. He's not some no-good misfit that got chosen out of the barrel and he has no morals whatsoever, even in a high office, all right? And thy princes eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. In other words, they take strength because they've got work to do, and they use common sense. And that way a country is blessed by God rather than perversion. Verse 18, but much slothfulness, that's to say laziness, neglect, putting off, the building decayeth. By much laziness, slothfulness, neglect, the building decayeth. And through idleness of the hands, the house droppeth through. Now, The word droppeth here in the Hebrew is leaks. If a house leaks into an attic, what happens over a period of time and neglect? Pretty soon the whole rafters fall in, because water, as it drips through the roof unrepaired, rots the structure, the joist and so forth, until the whole thing falls in. Why? Because somebody was too lazy to patch the roof. So in your life, coming out the gate, God doesn't care for lazy people, all right? Proverbs is very hard on lazy people. And I suppose at least they come maybe before the fool a little bit, the ratchet jaw, but about the same pattern. God doesn't like them, can't use them, and doesn't necessarily want them unless they can get their act together. Don't misquote me. I said unless they get their act together. That a man won't. It's the old saying, a stitch in time saves nine. In other words, if you don't fix that leak, and that's what the Hebrew word is, and that's the way it should be translated. No excuse it isn't. That if he fixes the leak where the water cannot come in to decay the wood, it would have been a real easy thing. But you can lose your whole house because of it. You can lose your whole house by being lazy and not making your payments as well, by not working. You can lose everything you've got if you so choose and wish to practice laziness. I mentioned Proverbs a moment ago. The one I like best is where God says a lazy man is to a bed like a set of hinges are to a door. All he can do is flop from one side to the other as he turns over in bed. That's what God's opinion, Almighty God's opinion is of a lazy man. It's all he's fit for. Okay, verse 19. A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. In other words, money is behind it. If you're going to make a feast, it costs money. But the thing is, to have this, one must plan ahead and must know when to do it properly, whereby it is proper, if that should be. You certainly wouldn't plan a feast in the middle of the day when you're supposed to get something done. Not very often you would, unless it was a very special occasion. And is this saying then, no, it means that you can't be lazy and not bring in the cash and be able to do anything. And to do it, money makes it possible. So use your gourd to the point that you're not lazy, you're not a ratchet jaw, that your very words from your mouth make you makes sure that you are found graceful, with grace in your community, so that if somebody wants someone to do a particular job in your profession, you're going to be asked. You're going to get ahead. That's the advice, and that is wisdom, and that's what we have built to at this point. It takes money to do things. Money won't necessarily make you happy, money alone. There's got to be a balance. But with it, then comes the feast and the joy and so forth. It will make you happy. Verse 20, curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber. For a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. In other words, the person in authority, if you're cursing them, is going to get the word. Now, many people say, well, I make sure that no one hears me. Then you are a fool. And I'll tell you why. Because God even knows what you're thinking. And all wisdom comes. If you even think the thought, God hears it and knows it. If you curse someone unjustly, God will curse one that is evil. God sends curses on those that ask, well, what bad thing God will do to us today? He makes sure that something bad is done to them. But the point is that all wisdom comes from God, and if God is with you, you're going to be blessed. If you love Him and do His bidding, and as you are taking care of business of this world, in other words, this is not to say you're to become a holy Joe and just sit around being holy all the time. That's laziness, all right? It is. And I know that might offend some. I don't apologize. God expects His holy people, though their best deeds kind of are as dirty rags compared to God's righteousness. Just putting things in perspective here a little bit. But He expects you to do what is right because you represent Him in as much as you're His child. So even when you whisper to your wife who would never breathe a word outside, God still knows. Now I understand what a curse is, okay? It is one thing to say, you know, I wish God would give us the ability to help this person or that person. But if you're saying to the missus, I really wish God would send this person to hell. I wish this God would destroy that person. Now, that's not really good. You want to kind of hope that God will give them the wisdom to want to help themselves. Because if a man will not help himself, no one can help him. That's just the way it is. But I want to make it very clear, it's real easy with a thought such as that to leave your father out of the equation. Don't do it. He doesn't like it. Not if you claim to love Him. You cannot leave God out of the equation. That's why many times you'd better say, if your tongue slips a little bit, forgive me, Father. I didn't mean it quite exactly that way. Okay. Or thy will, you know what is deserved, you do the judging, all right? Or cursing to suit your will. But, I mean, that's why God is telling you the very rooms that you're in have ears, because God hears. Not only that, He's warning you that walls have ears. There's always, in this heavily populated world, someone that will say they're your friend, and they're not really your friend. They're going to make sure, boy, they live on that gossip. Okay, interesting chapter, just a chapter of common sense, of everyday life. There's nothing fancy about that chapter. It's all down to earth, and it's sound, and it is simply a matter of using common sense. Okay, having said that, chapter 11, verse 1, let's go with it. Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Now, let's go to the spiritual on this. Who is the living bread? Christ is, of course. And from the book of Revelation, and we're really going to go deep, Revelation chapter 17 declares that the people of the world, or the waters spoken of in the book of Revelation, that the one world political system rises from, simply the people of the world. So if you cast, inasmuch as Amos 8:13 would stipulate that the famine of the end times is not for bread, but for hearing the word of God, which is the true bread of life, cast it upon the people. It's not going to come back void. God loves it. So we could teach this in a different way, but that cuts right to the quick of the matter and gets it said whereby it can be squared away in your mind without any problem. God blesses those. He knows what you're thinking, as pre-discussed. And it's going to come back to you positively, in a good way. So don't be afraid if God gives you a thing, a witness, cast it forth. Or, you know, there are people that need help occasionally in the world. Don't be afraid to cast favors upon them. And as a matter of fact, we'll get to that here. Verse 2. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. In other words, give a portion means give to the poor. 7 is spiritual completeness, all right? You know, make it complete, because you never know what evil that you might go broke, and you might need a little handout the next day yourself. So if you can afford it, be generous in your love offering, so to speak. You understand, tithes goes where you're taught. A love offering is to the poor, to help them. You cannot give a tithe to the poor unless it's your preacher, okay? And a good preacher is usually not poor. We'll cut to the quick on that also. Also, don't put all of your eggs in one basket, you know? If you can, be generous in helping the poor. That's what it's saying, okay? And thank goodness we live in such a prosperous time that people are in fairly good shape in this generation if they want to be. Of course, we will always have those with us that do not choose to be successful. Verse 3. If the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if the tree fall toward the south or toward the north, in the place where the tree falleth, there it shall be. Basically what this is saying is that man can't really alter a whole lot of what God has created and set in place. Can you run out and say, stop cloud, stop rain, don't rain on my place? Well, you can ask Father to intercede perhaps, but you cannot stop the rain yourself. And if you think you're asking the Father, is you doing it, you're sadly mistaken, and you're headed for a fall, because you're picturing yourself as being too large a donkey, all right? You're about to overload your donkey. God is in control, and man cannot alter what God has placed in the natural order of things. Now, a wise person knows that has worked in timber. You know, by wedging and so forth, we can alter a fall a little bit in the natural order of things by the way the cut is made. That's experience. But overall, if you cut it, it's going to fall. Why? God's gravity. God has things pretty well in place, and usually it's pretty well if man leaves them alone and doesn't try to mess with them. And you understand what I mean. Verse 4. He that observeth the wind shall not sow, and he that regardeth the clouds shall not reap. In other words, you take a person that's got to wait until the conditions are just absolutely perfect. Naturally, this is speaking of broadcast sowing, and wind really is a mess whenever it gets up too high. But if you plan to, oh, well, I'm going to go back to bed, it's the wind's blowing today, rather than maybe trying to pick a time that you could get it done. And so it is, meaning, and I've known people that would say, well, I'm going to wait till I'm perfect to be baptized. You will never be baptized if you wait until you're perfect, because you're never going to be perfect. Baptism will help you be a more perfect or mature person, but you're going to fall short. Even a man that does the most righteous of things occasionally slips. That's just the way it is. So what God is saying, hey, I've created the world the way it is, and in this old flesh world, you got to learn how to bow up to the rough spots as well as the easy sailing to make it through. If you waited to cut your hay until you had an absolute guarantee on it being able to cure without anything going wrong, you'd never get your hay in the barn, okay? So God is saying sometimes you have to take a little bit of a chance to get things done. Don't put off too much. This is not against using common sense, all right, in all things. But don't use it as an excuse to put off. Verse 5. As thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child, even so thou, now sharpen up for me, even so thou knowest not the works of God who maketh all. He does what? He maketh all. He's in charge. He's in control. He hears you. He knows you. He knows what you do. And he knows how those bones grow even in the womb. And I know there would be some, well, why does he let some be crooked? He didn't. Pollution in this world because people alter the natural nature of things. That's why. Okay? Verse 6, as we, again, never forget, God who maketh all. You belong to him. You may not claim to, but you do. And someday you're certainly going to find out when he gives you orders one way or the other of where you're going to go, up, down, or whatever. That's a figure of speech and easily understood. Verse 6, in the morning sow thy seed, and in the evening withhold not thine hand. For thou knowest not whether shall prosper, either this or that, or whether they both shall be alike good. In other words, keep sowing. You may have to plant a crop a second time. You may have to do something. You may have to lick your calf over. All right, that's an old saying, not only from the South, but everywhere. And if you keep sowing, sooner or later you're going to hit the crop, and and who knows, maybe it'll all be good. So don't wait for the time of a thing to be perfect. Remember, God says there's a time and a place, and he's the judge. Remember, we covered that, I think it was in the 7th chapter. Well, he surely is. Let's go one more verse and we'll stop for the day. Truly, the light is sweet, and a pleasant thing it is for the eyes to behold the sun. And there is a play upon the man that walks under the sun, that has eyes to see. Do you? You can walk under the sun, which is the idiom, never forget, I've repeated it so many times I feel like I'm talking down to you. It means the man walking in the flesh. How beautiful the sun is. Why? Because you have eyes to see the light. And that light is always truth, honesty, and our Heavenly Father showing the way, for Christ is that light. So, how do you gain eyes to see? By studying your Father's Word and listening to the simple, and you know, this doctrinal chapter, and that we have, these 2 chapters that we've covered parts of today, are very simple. It's just common sense in life, that's all. And at the same time, I hope you did not miss the most important thing of it. It's utilizing common sense in your everyday life, but knowing all the time that God is watching. Why is he watching? Because he loves you. He cares. Why do you think he gave this good advice? Because he wants you to be happy. He wants you to not make the mistakes that the dullard and the ratchet jaw and all the rest of them makes. He wants you to be successful. He wants you to have your eyes open. Do you know why? To receive his outstretched arms of blessings to be cast upon you when you try. You see, he knows what those walls hear. He knows when you're being honest with him, and he knows when you're not. So let your eyes be open and see the way of your Father. It will always bring blessings, and most also that through that love, happiness. You can be happy even in the flesh body. You don't have to wait for the eternity. Enjoy it now. Okay, bless your heart. You listen a moment. Don't miss the next lecture. Listen a moment.